above Zion Dalit. An animal that was found between Yerushalayim and Migdal Eder, or at a separation, males are assumed to be burnt offerings, and females are assumed to be peace offerings. Rabbi Yehuda says those suitable for Pesach offerings are assumed to be Pesach offerings during the 30 days before Pesach. Originally, they would seize collateral from the finder until he bought his nesachim. But when they began abandoning it and fleeing, Beis Din instituted that his nesachim should come from the public treasury. Said Reb Shimon, Beis Din instituted 7 ordinances, and this is one of them. The others are, if a country and sent nesachim with it, they are offered his own. If not, they are offered from the public treasury. Similarly, a proselyte who died and left offerings, if he had nesachim, they are offered from his own. If not, they're offered from the public treasury. It is a stipulation of business regarding a Kohen Gadol who died that his flour offering be brought from the public treasury. Rabbi Yehuda says it was purchased with his heirs. It says it was purchased with his heirs' money. In this case, it was offered whole. Okay. Regarding the salt and wood, Beis Din is that's yours, right?
Yeah,
that's yours. Okay.
Yeah.
I know you get very fussy about that. I know you get.
Well, it carries on the previous Mishna because we've just listed 4 of the takanas of Beis Din that they made in this context. That's the salt and the wood that the salt and wood that belongs to Hekdesh, right? That's being you use salt on the korbanot, and the wood is used to burn the korbanot. Okay, so they allowed the kohanim to benefit from them in other words, to salt the sacrificial meat that they were eating, and to cook the sacrificial meats that they're eating. Okay, but for their own personal chulin meat, that they didn't have permission. It was only for the purpose of eating. It is only for the purpose of eating kodshim that they were allowed to use the temple's salt and wood. Okay, so that was number 5. The alapara shelo yehu ma'olim be'efra. On the paraduma, that there was no din of me'ilah on the ashes. Now, how could Beis Din rule that there's no me'ilah if there is me'ilah? Well, the fact is that actually min Torah there is no me'ilah on the ashes of the cow. While it is before it's burned, there is me'ilah on the cow. But once the avodah has been done with it, there's no more din of me'ilah, and the ashes min Torah don't have a din of me'ilah. But Chazal said, listen, we want people to be careful with this stuff, so therefore we will institute a din of me'ilah midrabanan. Okay, that's in order to make people careful with the ashes of the cow. But then comes the law of unintended consequences, and the kohanim who were sprinkling people with the ashes in order to purify them, suddenly started second guessing and thinking, we're dealing with a bunch of Amei Aretz here. Maybe they're not really, maybe they weren't really Tamei. Maybe that, and if they don't really need a tahara, then we're just sprinkling these ashes for nothing. It's just like, and therefore we'll be guilty of me'ilah. So they became reluctant to participate in the sprinkling. So the Chachamim said, you know what? Just put it back to the Torah din. No me'ilah on the ashes of the para, and you don't have to worry about me'ilah if you sprinkle somebody who didn't really need sprinkling. Okay. And the final one, Balakinin apsulos, and on the puzzle nests, that is the pairs of turtle doves and young doves. Sheyu baros mishal tzibor. The psulos, if they were puzzle, then they're replaced from communal funds. So what's the din that we're talking about over here? Is that people who have to bring a nest, for example, a nazir or a yoledes, right? They can give money into the shofar akinim, and the Beis Din would then buy with this.
You froze.
What they can do is they can put money into the chest of the kinnim, and then Beis Din will buy with this the birds that they need for the.
So you're frozen. You're frozen.
Right. So we're saying that the birds, if somebody puts money into the chest for birds in order to fulfill their obligation, then they can take the funds and they purchase birds and they offer it on behalf of the Baalim.
Right.
Okay. Now, what happens if it turns out that the birds that they purchased turn out to be pasul, and there are no Baalim around there because the Kohanim are doing it on their behalf? You don't need the Baalim to be present for this one. So then they made the takana that the replacements will come from public funds. This is actually Rabbi Yossi Omer Hamasapek is akinim masapek is apsulos. He says, well, actually no. Remember that principle we had that the yad hektesh leona is that is that we always have the advantage to the temple. So the people who are providing all of the supplies to the temple are guaranteeing it that it will be good. Why don't you angle it up?
That's what I'm trying. No, it's not even on. So
no, I'm saying your cell phone. Why
my phone.
Tilt your phone up.
Oh, that's right.
There you go.
I just see me. Okay, not just see me. I don't want to see me. I want to see you. Oh, forget it.
That's good.
But I just see you. You'd see a big picture of me, don't you?
Yes, that's fine. I'm happy with this.
Oh, but then I can't fall asleep. All right, there we go. Okay.
Okay. So Rabbi Yossi is pointing out that if any of the birds turn out to be pasul, then it's the onus of the supplier to replace it. They guaranteed the good stuff. If the flour went wormy, we said they've got to replace it. And if the wine went sour, they've got to replace it. So the same thing. If the birds turn out to be pasul, the suppliers have to replace it, and the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. Okay. Perches, kol harukin.
Recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody's walking around in Yerushalayim and they see somebody has spat on the floor, okay, we kind of get grossed out by it nowadays. But apparently the culture of the time was that, if you got something in your mouth, you spat it out. So people were spitting all over the place, and I guess they weren't as finicky about hygiene as we are nowadays. Right. So now, if somebody is walking through Yerushalayim and they see some spit on the floor, there's a concern that the spit might have come from a zav.
Right.
And the spit of a zav is tameh, and if you touch it, you'll become tameh. Okay, and so people want to be careful about this. So the Mishnah tells us the principle, Kol harukin hanimtzaim b'Yerushalayim tohorin. If you see spit on the floor in Yerushalayim, you don't have to assume it's tamei. Chutz mishel shuka elyon, except for the upper marketplace, according to Rabbi Meir. Okay, now what's the deal of what's the deal here with this shuka elyon, right? Because what's over here, the launderers, this is in the upper marketplace. There were some non-Jewish launderers who were there, and the Chachamim made a gezerah on non-Jews that they would be like Zavim completely. Okay, even though they don't have a din of Ziba min Torah, Chachamim made a din on them that they're considered Zavim, and therefore if they spat, then their spittle is like that of a Zav. Okay, and also people say that even the Zavim, the Jewish Zavim, who generally distance themselves from other people would be found over there, but in the rest of Yerushalayim, the Zavim were considerate and didn't want to be matamei other people. Yeah. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'shar yemos hashana, he says during the rest of the year, not during the Chagim, in other words, shebe'emtza tamein, then the middle of the street is where everyone is walking. And he says that we have to be suspicious that there have been Zavim walking in the middle of the street, and they might have spat. But Shebetzadim Tahorim, but so the Tahor people make sure that they stay towards the edges of the Rosh Hashanah during the rest of the year. Okay, so there it's considered Tahor. B'shas Regel, but during the time when there's a lot of people coming in Aliyah Regel, Shebe'emtza Tahorim, there the Zavim are considerate and they move over to the side because they know how many people have come specifically to be in the Mikdash. Therefore, the middle is Tahor, V'Shebetzadim Tamein. And what's on the side is Tameh, because that's where the Zavim pulls themselves off to. So because the Zavim are the minority over here, they will go over to the side. Honestly, when he says Shehen Mu'atin, the fact is that there are a lot of heterim, reasons why somebody would not be a Zav. So it's difficult to say that you have a lot of zavim even during the year because it's not easy to become a zav. However, a nida has the same dinim as many of the same dinim, particularly hospital. So therefore, I think they might be concerned with the nidas because they've got the same issue with their spittle. So maybe that's what his concern was. Okay, Mishnah base. כל הכלים הנמצאים בירושלים דרך ירידה לבית התפילה טמאים, דרך עלייה טהורין שלו ודרך ירידה סני עלייה סן דיבר Rabbi Meir. So what is Rabbi Meir saying? He says that if you're walking through Yerushalayim and you find a kli lying on the ground on the way down to the mikveh.
Right.
So he says you should then you must presume that this kli is tameh, because it was found on the path down to the mikveh. But if it was found on the path back up from the mikveh, then you can presume it fell after it had been to mikveh, and therefore it's tahor. He says because people don't take the same path down to the mikveh as they do up. It's a sort of a one-way track down and up. So this is Rabbi Meir. This would have to apply. I guess they had a lot of mikvahs, and I guess they designed all of them according to Rabbi Meir. They designed all of the mikvahs with a clear entry and exit path. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kolan Tahorin, says forget about it. You don't have to presume that any particular kli is tameh. The only thing that you have to worry about is particular tools. Just give me a sec. This is my son calling. Okay. So back to Rabbi Yossi, he says that you don't have to assume anything is tameh. The only thing is that you have to assume is tameh is something that's specifically made for dealing with tumah. So he says, so these particular tools that are designated for digging graves.
Right.
Okay, the basket and the hoe and what's the translation of that you've got over there for these tools?
We have the basket. We have a shovel. I just lost. Can't get this turned. Come on. We have the We have the basket. The shovel and the spade. Okay. That's reserved for the grave sites.
Right, and remember also in those times, their custom was to bury the dead for a year, allow the body to decompose, and then to gather up the bones. So they would dig up the bones again and put them into the family burial cave. So this is I think there's a very practical reason for this, is that if you've got a small burial cave and your relatives keep dying, you're going to run out of space fast if you're burying everyone in a 6-foot grave. So they would just gather the bones together and then bury the bones inside the cave. Okay, but those tools. So according to Rabbi Yossi and the halacha follows him, there's no reason to suspect that any particular kli is tameh unless there's a reason to suspect that it's tameh, as in the case of these particular tools.
Okay.
All right. Daled.
It's over here. Daled. What did they do with the remainder of the truma? They made gold sheets to plate the Holy of Holies. Rabbi Yishmael says the profit of the fruits is used to purchase animals which are offered upon the altar when it is idle, and the remainder of the truma is used for the utensils needed for the temple service. Rabbi Akiva says the remainder of the truma is used to purchase animals which are offered upon the altar when it is idle, and the remainder of the nesachim is used for the utensils needed for the temple services. Rabbi Hanina, Sagan of the Kohanim, says the remainder of the nesachim is used to purchase animals which are offered upon the altar when it is idle, and the remainder of the truma is used for the utensils needed for the temple service. Neither one nor the other admitted concerning the permissibility of profiting from the fruits.
Right, because that's only Rabbi Ishmael says that you're allowed to do trade with the leftovers. Okay.
What did they do with the remainder of this incense? They would set aside from the truma an amount equal to the artisan's wages and would redeem the incense with the artisan's wages. Then they would give the incense to the artisans as the wages and repurchase it from them with funds from the new truma. If the new Shekalim came in time, they purchased the incense with funds from the new truma, if not from the old. If one consecrated his possessions, and among them were things suitable for communal offerings, these things should be given to the artisans for their wages. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai said to him, this is not the same method described above. Rather, they set aside from these things an amount equal to the artisan's wages and redeem them with funds set aside for the artisan's wages. Then they give them to the artisans as their wages, and repurchase them with funds from new truma. Okay.
All right. Pesachim Gimel Daled.
Rabbi Gamliel says, the three women may knead at the same time and bake in the same oven, one after the other. But the Chachamim say 3 women may be occupied with dough simultaneously. One kneads, another shapes, and a third bakes. Rabbi Akiva says not all women and not all kinds of wood and not all ovens are alike. This is the general rule. If the dough rises, let her wet it with cold water. Partially leavened dough must be burned, but one who eats it is exempt from punishment. Furrowed dough must be burned, and one who eats it is liable. Which dough is classified as purely leavened when the furrows are like locust horns, which is classified as furrowed, when the furrows run into each other. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. But the Chachamim say if one eats either of these, he is liable to kares. If so, which is partly leavened dough, whenever surface returns pallid like that of a man whose hair stands on end. If the 14th of Nisan fell on the Sabbath, we remove everything before Shabbos. These are the words of Rav Meir. But the Chachamim say everything is removed at its usual time. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok says truma must be removed before Shabbos and chulin at its usual time. Okay. Okay. Gimel Aleph. How does one separate the Bikurim? When a man goes down into his field and sees a ripe fig, a ripe cluster of grapes, or a ripe pomegranate, he ties reed grass around it and says, let these be Bikurim. Rabbi Shimon says, nevertheless, he designates them again as Bikurim after they are plucked from the soil. How do they take up the Bikurim? All the cities of Mamad gather in the city of the Mamad and spend the night in the open place of the city, and they did not enter the houses. And to the early rising, the officer said, arise and let us go to Zion, up to Zion, to the house of our Lord our God. Those near brought figs and grapes, and those far brought dried figs and raisins. As the ox went before them with its horns gold plated and an olive crown on its head. The flute played before them, all until they arrived at close to Yerushalayim. When they arrived close to Yerushalayim, they set before them and bedrock their Bikurim. The supervisors, the supervisors and the deputies and the treasurers went out to meet them. They went out according to the rank of those entering, and all the craftsmen in Jerusalem stood before them and greeted them, our brethren, men of such and such a place, come in peace.
William.
Olive Talit. A pebble in a loaf, a large clump of salt, or a lupin, or a burnt crust that is greater than a ping of breath. Rabbi Yossi says, whichever is not eaten together with it is tahor in regard to an avatuma, and it is needless to say in regard to a table yom. Barley and spelt that are not peeled with asafodatida, and alum. Rabbi Yehuda says even black beans are tahor in regard to avatuma, and is needless to say in regard to a table yom. These are the words of Rabbi Meir, but the Chachamim say they are tahor in regard to a table yom, but they are tummy in regard to all other sources of tuma. Barley and spelt and wheat, whether it is peeled or not peeled, kitzech, sesame, and pepper. Rabbi Yehuda says even white beans are tamei in regard to a tel yom, and it is needless to say in regard to all other sources of tumah. Okay, and one more. Liquids that emanate from a toivel yom are like liquids that he touches. Both these liquids and those liquids do not render foods tamei, and with respect to all the other sources of tumah, whether they are tamei to a light degree or a severe degree, liquids that emanate from them are like liquids that touch them. And both these liquids and those liquids are considered the beginning of Talmud Tumah, with the exception of the liquid that is an Ava Tumah.
The general principle is that its full yom is considered like a sheni latuma.
Okay.
So that's so even if he touches truma, it doesn't. Wait, no, hang on. If he touches truma, he will passel it. But if he touches chulin, the chulin remains tahor.
We have Zion Vav. I was supposed to pull out another one, I think, but all right.
Yeah.
Concerning all consecrated animals that are slaughtered with intent for beyond their time and outside their place, they must be burned. And unnecessary asham talul must be burned. Rabbi Yehuda says it must be buried. A buried carcass that is brought out of doubt must be burned. Rabbi Yehuda says one must throw it into the stream. All items that must be burned may not be buried, and all items that must be buried may not be burned. Rabbi Yehuda says if one wishes to be stringent with himself to burn items that must be buried, he is permitted. And they said to him, it is not permitted to deviate.
Right, so because there's a kula and there's a chumrah by each one. Like with burning, you really are kind of destroying it from the world. But there's a kula with burning, which is that once it's burned, the ashes are permitted to use. Whereas something that needs to be buried, and it's never permitted to use. So if you burn something that was meant to be buried, you might come to make a mistake and think the ashes are permitted, and they're not. Okay. Is tomorrow. Now we can go on to Croesus.
Okay, I didn't take it out. I'm sorry. It was right after. Wait, no. Yes, right. No.